I am seeing a lot of bullish technical signs in the past few days, so I will say this. I did do some buying in the S&P 500 this Wednesday after we got the tariff pause news. From a technical perspective, there's a lot of potential bottoming signs in the S&P 500 right now.
As early as April 11th, 2025, our Chief Technical Strategist Larry Tentarelli stated publicly that he believed that the pullback lows were in for this cycle. In an ex-post with over 148,000 views and also on the Schwab Network, Fox Business, and other media outlets.
All right, folks, my next guest says that his best case technical view is that the low for this year for the S&P might have been put on April 7th. That's 48.35. I'm going to bring in now Blue Chip Daily, their founder, also Chief Technical Strategist, Larry Tentarelli. Larry, let's walk through this chart. I love this chart, by the way. You have a chart very similar to this that you share it with your subscribers. Walk through the importance. What are you seeing here that people should see?
There's a few very important things that I see here. So the first thing, down here 2 weeks ago, this was the highest volume week in the S&P 500 in 14 years.
14 years.
14, going back to 2011. Wow. And it happened with a major reversal week. This is a very constructive week. What we saw here was a very high volume selling flush and reversal. So the S&P moved 13% off the lows here on a tremendous amount of volume. Historically, that's how most major bear markets end.
Right. So that's a major buy signal.
That's a major buy signal.
What do you think about the markets? What are you feeling? What's happening here?
It's acting much better now. I think 2.5 weeks ago, I think we put in a major low into the S&P 500. We had the highest weekly volume in 14 years, and it was a 13% upside reversal week. So from the dead lows, 13% higher. That's indicative of how many bear markets have ended in the past. And then last week, we had another very strong breadth thrust higher. And it looks like this week we've got intraday dips that are being bought. It's all very bullish price action.
So it's interesting. So that you think that the low may be in.
Yes.
I mean,
I will say this. Last week, the S&P 500 had the highest weekly volume in the past 14 years. That's very similar to how prior bear markets have bottomed. So there's some positives in the technicals right now.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more, too, because sentiment. You love the fact that there's so much negative sentiment, and
right.
particularly amongst the experts, right? This is the Bank of America chart,
right.
That survey from last week, and these are fund managers, right? And they're
yes.
they're just completely bearish, but it coincides with other bottom.
Exactly. So they've basically, from a sentiment level, this is based on their growth expectations. They have extremely low growth expectations. But if you look on this chart, it shows when they've also had extremely low expectations, and that coincides with major lows in the S&P 500. So right about the time that the fund managers have thrown in the towel on growth, that's usually the lows. 2 weeks ago, the S&P 500 had the highest weekly volume in 14 years, and it did that in a major selling flush and reversal. So we've got two trends to look at. We're in a weekly downtrend, but we are in a potential bottoming process. It's very high volatility, but as long as the S&P stays over 48.35, then the recovery attempt is intact.